he would murder 4 women across 6 days and attempted to kill at least 2 more. Hello, true crimerers. This is the old-timey case known as the Blackout Killer. Viewer discretion is advised. Hop aboard the way back machine, folks, because we're going back all the way to the 40s for this one. The 1940s, back during a time when color hadn't been invented yet, I believe, and everything and everyone was just black and white. It was a very dull time, very boring, but what can they do before color was invented? So, these are facts. Gordon Frederick Cummins, he was born on February 18th, 1914, and just to put that into perspective, that's just 2 years after the Titanic sank. Damn! He was born in North Yorkshire, England. Now, this is kind of an unusual one because typically if I talk about serial killers or just murderers in general, the majority of them have some kind of horrific childhood or something bad happened in their childhood, but in this particular case, that doesn't appear to be true. Gordon was the first of 4 kids, and both of his parents were always in the picture. They were both very loving, very supportive people. They weren't filthy, dirty rich, but the family also wasn't poor. They made enough money to support the family and, give the kids whatever they needed. Gordon's mom was a housewife, and his dad actually owned a school that was meant to cater to, I guess, to like the delinquent young folk of the days and to make sure that they were all properly educated and taken care of. Gordon himself, well, he went to a few different la-di-da type schools, very, private schools, he was very fortunate to have, private education. He was considered very well educated. He took to school very well. He didn't get, amazing grades, but he also didn't get bad grades. He was your very average student. He never got bullied. He never was the bully. He kind of just sort of was there, right? Sort of in the middle. He was done with the high school era sometime around 1930, and then he would attend college. He went to Northampton College of Technology, but he only really stayed there for a couple of years before he just inevitably dropped out. When he was 18, he would move to the Newcastle area where he got a job working in chemistry. Which is what I guess he really excelled in high school, was chemistry, and that's kind of what work he was looking for. But after a few months, he was fired. And then after that, he got himself a job working as a tanner. No, you silly gooses, he wasn't someone who did spray tans on people. He wasn't putting people in those crazy tubes with all the lights. A tanner, back then, and still is, someone who would take animal hides, animal skins, they would treat the animal skins and turn them into, essentially, leather. He did very well at this. He was good with his hands, he was good with tools, and he excelled, but unfortunately, he just had an issue with showing up to work or staying at work, and so after about a year or so of doing this, he was canned. After this, he would bounce around from job to job, doing odd jobs here and there, never being able to really hold down the fort for very long. And then he, I guess, found new ways to make money. So he was going around to everyone that, I guess, were acquaintances to him in his life. He would go around and pretend that he came from, a noble family. From a super wealthy family. He would make people in his life refer to him as the Honorable Gordon Cummins to make himself look more important and more lavish than he and his family actually were. Like I said, his family wasn't poor. They weren't in bad shape. They just weren't a noble family. In the way he would kind of put on the facade that his royal family, his noble family, was giving him all sorts of money. Well, he acquired money by stealing. He would steal jewelry from people and sell it. He would also embezzle money as well. And he did this for quite some time. By 1935, he joined the Royal Air Force, or the RAF. He enlisted at the Air Crew Reception Center, and he really wanted to, fly. At first, he was really just more there for maintenance. He was, fixing up planes and cleaning and all of that. But eventually he would work himself up to learn how to fly. And then he would go up the ranks, and eventually he became an actual aircraftman, and he flew planes. He didn't really get along with people so well there at the Royal Air Force because, again, he was continuing on this behavior of like, well, I'm from a royal family, so please address me as such. But really it just made him super annoying to people, and so everyone just like, ugh, that guy. By 1939, World War II was kicking into gear, going into 1940, 41, that kind of thing. So he was stationed in various places over the course of like the beginning of the war, but essentially he kind of eventually would settle his family down because at this point he was now married. They would settle the family down in London, even though he was stationed in various places. Anytime he was, off duty or whatever, he would go back to London. Now, this again is during the war, and London, like many places, were doing blackouts. Essentially, what that meant back then was they would purposefully make sure none of the lights in the towns and the cities were on, that basically everything was just sort of dark. The reason why they would do that is to prevent the enemies from above seeing and, identifying targets and locations and not just dropping bombs wherever. There were still air raids, and parts of London and other places, of course, were bombed and caused a lot of rubble and chaos and destroyed homes and buildings and all of that. So it was a very obviously very terrifying time, very hectic, very chaotic. And so what would then happen within that was just not helping matters whatsoever. On February 8th, 1942, Gordon was back in London, and he was visiting his wife, and he wanted to go out and have some fun that evening, and so he got some of the family's, their money from his wife, and he said, hey, I'm going to go out on a night in the town and have some fun. I'll be back a little bit later, see? Well, on the morning of February 9th, 1941, a body was found. That of 41-year-old Evelyn Hamilton. She was a prostitute in the area of London. She was known as someone who would, in particular, servicemen. Her body was found, I guess, in a raid shelter in the city, and she was partially clothed. The clothes that were not on her were just sort of thrown to the side. Her scarf was wrapped around her head. Her skirt was pulled up above her, like towards her stomach and chest, and her breasts were exposed. And she had basically a nylon or some kind of clothing item wrapped tightly around her throat. And so they determined that she had been strangled to death. Her high heels were broken, and there appeared to be signs of a struggle, and there were indications on her body that she had put up one hell of a fight, and whoever her attacker was, she really probably gave them some serious damage, hopefully. Based on where she was found, the authorities believe that she was probably met by her attacker somewhere near an alleyway as she was trying to walk home, and was accosted and then attacked and then murdered. They aren't 100% positive if she was sexually assaulted. This is obviously in the early 40s, so they did not have the forensic tools that we have now, so they didn't like collect any kind of like DNA evidence, because they didn't know what DNA even was. They did have fingerprint technology back then, but they did not find any fingerprints at her crime scene. Police barely had a moment to even process all of this before another body showed up. At approximately 8:30 in the morning on February 10th, 1942, the body of 34-year-old Evelyn Oatley was found. Evelyn Oatley was also a lady of the night there in the area. She was discovered in her own home on her bed, on her back, the comforter pulled up all the way to her throat. She had been severely beaten, and there appeared to be an attempt to strangle her, and then there was a severe cut to the side of her throat, which they believe was the actual cause of death. The thing that separates this one from the previous murder was that she was mutilated, sexually mutilated. Her private areas were cut, they were slashed, Her abdomen, her breasts, everything was just cut as if this person had some sort of anger towards her, like some severe animosity towards this woman. She did not appear to have any defensive wounds. There did not appear to be any sign of struggle. There did not appear to be any sign of forced entry, so she probably let this individual in. There was, however, stuff thrown about, like her purse was emptied and thrown everywhere, and they believe that some money was stolen from it. In this particular case, they did find fingerprints at the crime scene on a couple different items. However, because, they didn't have technology then that we have now, they couldn't just plug it into a system and find a match within minutes. So looking like eye to eye, with their eyes, looking against other fingerprints, they didn't find any matches from the get-go. According to a witness, this witness saw Evelyn with a young white male walking with her towards her apartment. He appeared to be kind of like unshaven a little bit. He was about 5'8", 5'9", pretty slim-ish build, and appeared to have a very friendly demeanor. And then another witness at approximately 11:40 p.m. saw Evelyn walk into her place with this unknown man. And that was the last time anyone saw her alive. Apparently, people did hear some kind of struggle or screaming taking place within her apartment, but no one actually did anything about it. Again, this is wartime, and it's a crazy, crazy time. So, again, it's different times. Again, barely had any chance to even start this investigation when another body showed up. February 11th, 1942, 43-year-old Margaret Florence Lowe, also a prostitute in the area, she was also found brutally murdered. A witness said they last saw her at around 1 o'clock in the morning walking into her flat with a white male, approximately 5'8", 5'9". He looked relatively young, sort of unshaven, very similar to the description of the man that was seen with the previous victim. But yeah, she was found in her house, on her bed. She was found with her legs kind of bent up at the knee underneath her comforter. She was also beaten very badly, and also appeared that someone tried to strangle her. In this particular case, it appeared the strangulation was what led to her actual death, and she was killed with her own silk stocking. There were also very extensive injuries to her body. The coroner described this person, whoever did it, as a savage sexual maniac because her body was ravaged. Her private areas, her stomach, her back was just completely sliced, cut, stabbed, like someone was taking out some kind of anger on this poor woman. There is some indication that she may have actually been alive still when the mutilation began, but they weren't 100% positive. Margaret was a mother, and she was doing an honest living for quite some time, but because of the onset of the war, things changed, lives changed, and so she kind of felt she was almost forced into doing prostitution in order to, support her child and support herself. And so, unfortunately, it's what led to her horrific death. Again, no time to breathe. February 12th, 1942. 25-year-old prostitute Catherine Mulcahy. She had taken a young man to her apartment for sexual acts. Apparently, he offered to pay her about £2 for the services, which back then is a lot of money. Basically, she got into the apartment, she lit a fire, and then she started taking off her clothes. He started taking off his clothes, and then he approached her and kind of pushed her down on the bed, where he then jabbed his knee into her abdomen and pinned her down, while he then tried to strangle her. And she had taken off all of her clothes except for her boots at this point. And so what she did was she kind of wrestled and fought back. She managed to lift her leg all the way back, and she kicked him straight in the chest with her boot. And it completely knocked him off the bed and onto the floor. So Catherine was able to then get up and run. She ran to her neighbor across the hall and said, "Oh my God, I need help." And all of a sudden, this man comes out of her apartment, goes to the apartment she ran to, and gives her more money and says, "I am so sorry. I didn't mean any of that. I'm super drunk. I'm out of sorts." And then he just took off. She wasn't buying that. He tried to strangle her. You don't just do that accidentally. And so she called the authorities. Finally, a piece of evidence was left behind by this person. A webbing belt, I guess. And it was specific to the RAF. So this was Royal Air Force members' belts. They also found fingerprints on an object from left behind by this individual. Several hours later on the exact same day, 32-year-old Doris Jeanette was last seen alive at 10:20 p.m. that night. She had been out drinking with some friends, and then I guess Doris said that she had arrangements to meet with a client of hers because she's also a prostitute. And a client that she referred to as the captain. Witnesses saw Doris with this unknown man, again, about a white male, about 5'8", 5'9", looked young, had kind of an unshaven face, with her, and then witnesses saw them go into her apartment. The next day, Doris is found brutally murdered in her apartment. Her body was found on her own bed. She had on just a nightgown that was open, and she had nothing on underneath it. She also had a silk stocking wrapped very tightly around her throat. And she, too, was horrifically mangled. Her private areas, again, just like the other two victims before this, she was just slashed and gashed and cut everywhere. This person focused a lot on her vaginal area and her breasts in terms of the mutilation. They also determined that there was some money stolen from the place, and it was kind of chaotic in there. But it didn't look like a struggle had actually taken place, just that this person was just rummaging through, trying to find things to steal. Doris was kind of similar to some of the other victims, whereas she was working an honest living before the war, and then the war caused her to have to move into this area of work. She also had a family, and it's just, it was just the times, unfortunately. Again, no time to think. February 13th, 1942, another woman is brutally attacked, but she survives as well. A young woman named Margaret Haywood. Margaret was seen having drinks and some food with a young man. People didn't really recognize the man, and apparently the conversation they seemed to be having was very civil, very normal, and then Margaret left the place with him. Margaret was kind of walking with this man, and they're having a conversation until it turned kind of like a little mean-spirited on his behalf, and he basically just accosted her, and then he pushed her down this alleyway, and they were near a raid shelter, and Margaret says that he says, "Hey, let's go in there and we'll have sex." And she goes, I'm not that kind of person. I don't do that. And he then hit her and then strangled her. He choked her until she passed out, and then her purse drops to the ground, and he's rummaging through her purse when this 18-year-old kid just happens to be walking by, and he sees what's going on. He says, "Hey, what are you doing?" And so this man who had accosted Margaret, he bolted. And when he did so, he dropped an item. He dropped a gas mask. The authorities were made aware of this, and then she was brought to the hospital, and Margaret would survive. She gave a description of this man. It sounds like she had just met him and didn't really know much about him. But the description she gave was extremely similar to the description of the man involved in these other attacks and murders. So police had collected the gas mask because Margaret said he had it on him. She knows it was his. And then they also look at the belt, the RAF belt that was left at the other crime scene where the other victim survived. There are these little service tag numbers on each of these items, and the service tag numbers they're able to identify to a certain unit within the Royal Air Force, I guess, at the time. And they then called, I guess, that unit, spoke to the commanding individual, and that specific number was traced back to one particular individual. That was Gordon Cummins. Those were his belongings. It was his belt, and it was his gas mask. When they asked Gordon, why are your items at these crime scenes, he's like, I don't know what you're talking about, and he presented his belt and his gas mask. Well, it turns out the belt and gas mask he presented to them at that time were stolen from different servicemen. So basically, he realized he had left them behind, at his crime scenes and then stole items to make it look like he didn't lose his at all. So the two surviving witnesses would get a lineup of men, and Gordon Cummins was in those lineup. One of the witnesses basically appeared to be too scared to identify Gordon, maybe perhaps feeling that she may get in trouble or she may get hurt if she does ID him. The other witness was like, nah, that's him. That Gordon, that's the guy that did that to me. And then they took his fingerprints and they ran it against the fingerprints found at the various crime scenes. Lo and behold, his prints are a match. They then searched, I guess, a little compartment he had in a trunk, and in that compartment were several items. Those items were confirmed to be stolen items from the various crime scenes from the murder victims. He had said, "Oh, I was just borrowing that trunk from someone. That wasn't even mine. So I didn't take that stuff." But then no one would say like he was borrowing the trunk from them, and really it just didn't seem feasible. He was lying. He denied all of it. He said, "I had nothing to do with this. You got the wrong guy. See, it's not me. The lion, see?" But the fingerprints, the stolen items, the gas mask, the belt, the eyewitness testimony, the witness description of the man, all matched and pointed to Gordon Cummins. So he was arrested. They basically were calling him responsible for the 4 murders and the 2 attempted murders, but they really only ever actually charged him with the murder of the very first victim, which was Evelyn Hamilton. Throughout the arrest and the trial, he's saying, "You got the wrong guy, it's not me." He kept going on about it, but the evidence was overwhelming. His trial, and they do things really fast back then. The murders took place in the February timeframe of 1942. His trial began in April of 1942. They don't mess around back then. And then his trial lasted about 4 or 5 days. The jury deliberated for approximately 35 to 40 minutes. And they came back and said, "You're guilty, bud. You're very, very guilty." When trying to figure out why he did all this, they just believed he was this super secret sexual deviant. He didn't really have a genuine motive because, again, he didn't have a horrible childhood. He had a really good childhood. His upbringing was great, loving family, lots of support. He never showed any signs of poor attitude or devious stuff ever in his life. So this was all very just out of nowhere for Gordon. His wife was like, "There's no way he did all this. I don't believe it." She stood by him. His family stood by him. But the fact of the matter is the evidence doesn't lie, even back in 1942. There were 2 murders that took place before this in around October of 1941. This is also in an area of London. A young woman named Maple Churchyard and then another woman named Edith Humphreys were both found murdered and strangled, and one of them had some severe cuts and mutilations to her body. Gordon was never formally charged with any connection to those murders, and they never had anything to even say they could say for certain it was him, but he was in the area when those murders occurred. And so they just kind of have a hunch that he was responsible for them. So he may have killed up to 6 women and tried to kill at least 2 more. And they nicknamed him the Blackout Killer because the 4 murders happened during the blackout period when, during the war, when they had all the lights off and everything. And they think he did it during that time because it may have been, he thought maybe it was harder for anyone to see him, for any witnesses to come forward, anything like that. But obviously that wasn't the case. So Gordon's found guilty. And then when it came to sentencing, the judge said this to him: "Gordon Frederick Cummins, after a fair trial, you have been found guilty, and on a charge of murder. As you know," why did I change my voice? "As you know, there is only one sentence which the law permits me to pronounce, and that is you be taken from this place and put in a lawful prison, and thence to a place of execution, where you will be hanged by the neck until you are dead. May God have mercy on your soul." Again, the accent change. Jesus, Lola has been snoring like a mad lady this entire video. And again, they don't mess around back in the olden days, because his execution was scheduled for June of 1942, just a few quick months after he was convicted. Nowadays, here in the States at least, they're waiting sometimes 25, 30 years for it to happen. He did try to appeal, but the courts were like, no, shut up, you're not appealing this. And so he was denied an appeal. On June 25th, 1942, at Wandsworth Prison, Gordon was walked down the hallway and into a room where an old-timey, rickety gallows was constructed. He was placed on the platform, a bag was put over his head, and then a noose around his neck. They pulled the lever, and he dropped. And he would be pronounced dead just a few moments later. And with his death, at the very least, 4 murder victims and 2 attempted murder victims, and possibly 2 more murder victims, got some kind of justice. And I hope that their families got peace, and I hope the victims themselves are resting in peace. It would be a psychic that became instrumental in solving this case. Hello, true crimerers. This is the case of Jennifer McCrady. Viewer discretion is advised. Jennifer McCrady was born on December 4th, 1965, and she lived her entire life in Ohio. When this case occurs, Jennifer McCrady is the mother to 2 young children, and to Jennifer, the kids were her entire life. They meant everything to her, and she was just such a fantastic mom. Jennifer was also married to a man named Jack McCrady, who was an Ohio State Highway Patrol trooper. And on September 19th, 1996, Jack McCrady calls 911 to report his wife missing.
Belfry Police Department.
Hi, this is True McCrady.
Uh-huh.
My wife is missing.
I'll have an officer come in and give you a call up there and talk to you.
Okay.
On the phone call, Jack did not come off at all as like in a rush or like he was upset. He didn't seem to be panicking. He just seemed to be really calm, cool, and collected while reporting his wife missing. A few hours go by and he calls 911 again to say, you know what? Never mind, call it off. I think I know where she probably is, or I have an idea at least.
She is apparently not missing.
Okay.
She's cleaned out pretty much everything what she owned.
Okay.
Wedding rings were laying on the kitchen counter. Apparently she's all right.
He told the dispatcher that he had looked around the house and saw that Jennifer, her belongings were gone, like her purse and stuff like that. And that she also had taken $3,000, I guess, from their account or something, and then just left. She just left to probably go be with another man. That's what he speculated. The only thing she seemed to leave behind was her wedding ring. Oh, and also her 2 kids. You know, those things you often forget when you're leaving the house. And, you know, when Jennifer's parents found out about this, they're like, yeah, no, this isn't sounding right to us. Those kids were her life. They loved her. She loved them more than anything else. There's no way. Something's wrong here. So 2 days go by, and Jack finally reports her missing again. So he actually attempts to file a missing persons report with the Washington County Sheriff's Department, which is in Marietta, Ohio. Jennifer and Jack, they lived in the town of Belpre. And so when he called Marietta, they're like, you got to call your local place. You should know that. You're a trooper. Jack McCrady was very familiar and very friendly with a lot of the police and law enforcement in this area, sheriff's department, police stations. It's a small little tight-knit community. And so it's kind of easy to get to know everyone. And Jennifer McCrady was also very well known to the same people. And as a matter of fact, Jack's colleagues loved Jennifer. They thought she was great. And when they found out that she was missing, they're like, all right, we're going to put everything down. We're going to go find her. And it seemed like Jack was trying to be like, oh, no, that's, she's probably just ran off with a guy. I mean, that's probably what this is. Once he started to see like how much attention this was getting, he seemed to kind of go, oh God, uh-oh. But the idea of Jennifer just picking up and leaving with some random guy, completely out of the question. Impossible? Sure. No, it's not impossible. But everyone who knew Jennifer, especially her own family, her friends and colleagues in the area, they all knew that that is not something she would ever do, and definitely would never leave her kids behind. So once the police started talking to Jack McCrady, he was trying to paint the picture of a really great, loving marriage. Everything was just hunky-dory. They argued like a normal married couple, but really everything was going good. And he told them that me and Jennifer, we are striving to give the happiest possible home for our kids that we can give. And that the two of them were deeply in love with each other. But something about Jack was just rubbing police the wrong way. That there's just something about his story and just his demeanor that just seemed just a little off. And there were people who were beginning to speculate that maybe Jack did something to her. Maybe he's involved with whatever happened to her. However, they had no evidence to suggest that. First of all, they didn't even have Jennifer. They don't know where she is. They are still searching for her. They put up missing persons flyers all over the area. They're searching on foot. They're searching by air. They're searching, and they're just not having any luck. And it did sound like the police who were investigating this felt that Jennifer likely met with foul play. Again, they just need the proof. And then a dispatcher, actually one of the dispatchers that had taken the missing persons call from Jack the first time, well, she had recommended to the detective, like, hey, I mean, worst comes to worst. We're at a standstill here, right? We don't know where she is. We need help. And so she suggests the idea of bringing a psychic in, specifically a psychic named Georgia Rudolph. And apparently Georgia Rudolph had been working with the Marietta police for quite some time, at least throughout the 90s. The detective was like, I'm not going to do that. I'm not going to call a psychic. But he's like, but you know what? We are desperate for anything. So if you, dispatcher, if you want to call her and, see if she can help, go for it. Let's see what she says. But he was like too prideful to do that himself at first. So the dispatcher tracks Georgia down to her home in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. And the dispatcher calls her on the phone and said, hey, listen, we have a missing person here in Belpre. We were wondering if you could help. And the psychic, Georgia, responds almost immediately with, you're actually not looking for a missing person. You are looking for a murder victim. That she was dead. The person you're looking for, she's dead. And the dispatcher, when she called, hadn't given her any information at all yet. Barely anything. So the dispatcher tells the lead detective, and he's still like, I can't do this, man. A psychic? Really? We're police officers. We're supposed to find like clues and fingerprints and DNA, not psychics, But after some time, he's like, all right, we need something. So, okay, I'll call her myself. And so he actually, on September 24th, he calls Georgia directly. And when he calls Georgia, he makes note not to mention anything about the case, nothing about the names or anything. And Georgia, she just starts talking. And she tells him, the young mother you're looking for, she's been shot. She was shot in the back of the head. And this was execution style. And so the detective was like, okay, do you know or did you see who did it? And she's like, I don't have his name, but he was a very imposing, very large lumberjack type figure, very like bulky. And when she said that, that described Jack McCrady to a T. He was over 6 feet tall, over 200 pounds. He was putting on a lot of muscle and he looked like a lumberjack. And she also says to the detective, you're not just looking for a normal person here, you're looking for a cop. A cop did this. And the detective was just like, what the how? Like, this hadn't been out in the public. The dispatcher and the detective had not given her any real information on this. And she was just saying a whole bunch of things that were like way too accurate, way too close. And he asks her, well, do you know where she is? And she doesn't have a specific location, but she says that the body is buried south of Belpre at the top of a gravel road, which is marked 298. Just by absolute happenstance, by coincidence, the day after he speaks with the psychic, a woman calls the detective and says, I have some information for you. She said that not that long ago, I saw a highway patrol car driving down this old oil field access road, and this was in Torch, Ohio. And this is about 11 miles south of Belpre. And she says she locked eyes with the driver, because this was in a patrol car, an officer's car, and that the guy behind the wheel, this officer, was staring daggers at her as they drove past each other the opposite ways. The detective asks her, well, whereabouts was this? Like, would you know the exact area? And she said, yeah, it was near the location. And she said, yeah, it was near road T298, which that immediately stood out to him because he's like, wait a minute, the psychic said she was near somewhere like a sign that said 298. This is what? So the detective goes to that access road where the witness said, she saw this. And lo and behold, he sees this little cross section of streets and it says 298 on it. And it's just as the psychic said it would be. And so he walks up a hill. He goes into this like gravel road kind of to the side. And this is a very it's like a wooded kind of area. It's a very secluded type of road. Not many people travel this road. And when he gets up to the top of the hill, he sees what looks like a freshly dug area, a grave maybe. But because he was no longer in his jurisdiction, he wanted to do this right. And so he called the authorities from that jurisdiction. They sent out an officer or detective, and that person was able to start pushing the dirt away from this freshly dug area. And he uncovered some kind of slick blue kind of material, and he realized it was a sleeping bag. And so why on earth would a sleeping bag be buried in this random location at the top of this hill? So he calls in their CSI before they do anything else. They bring in a team and they start to excavate the site, and they kind of just start getting the dirt off one scoop at a time, just to be careful not to disturb or damage anything. And they do find a blue sleeping bag, and it's about the length and the shape of a body. They open it up and they find a body. It was the body of a woman. She was barefoot and she was clearly in her pajamas. And they could tell that behind one of her ears was a gunshot wound. And based on just the visual, they were able to confirm that the victim had fought inside that grave was Jennifer McCrady. She was 30 years old. The gunshot wound was in the location that the psychic also said, right behind the ear, behind the head. When they told Jack, we found her, we found your wife and she's dead, he kind of put his head right into his hands and started to sob and cry uncontrollably. But when he lifts his head and his hands away, he's making the sounds, but there's no tears, not a single tear. His eyes hadn't even watered at that point. He was faking it. And the detectives basically looked at him and said, listen, Jack, you need to come forward. You need to tell us what happened. And he's like, I know what you're talking about. I didn't do anything. And so instead of helping them, the police and the detectives who are investigating this, he says, nope, getting a lawyer, which to be fair is the thing you should do. Whether you're guilty or innocent, always ask for a lawyer right off the bat. Don't let them get into your head before you're with a lawyer. But because they had found Jennifer's, remains, they are now able to get a warrant to search their home, the McCrady house. So police go there. It's a pretty large house. It's a pretty, beautiful home, kind of nestled kind of in the middle of nowhere almost, it looks like. But as they're searching, in the garage, they find a whole bunch of stuff. They find Jennifer's purse. They find her identification card. They find her car keys. They also find a .357 Magnum revolver in the house. And the coroner determined that she was shot with a .357. However, this gun in particular, which may have been the murder weapon, had clearly been tampered with. Someone had tampered with the inside of the barrel so that the lands and grooves that you can only line up under a microscope, you wouldn't be able to detect it. And that's kind of a red flag that someone did that in order to prevent anyone from identifying this as the murder weapon. They also find Jennifer's car abandoned a couple of miles away. No sign of a crime scene in the car, no blood, no hair, no broken windows, nothing, no belongings like a packed bag or anything were in there. And so it looked like someone had planted the car there, and that someone is looking like Jack. And so they're back at the house, they're searching some more, and they find something else. They find a shovel, and that shovel had some fresh dirt on it. And they would later take that in to be processed. They took dirt from where Jennifer's body was found and compared it with the dirt found on the shovel, and microscopically it was a match. It was the same dirt, but it is also dirt. And so it's that's not exactly foolproof per se. But because they have all of this, because they have her purse, which was hidden in a tucked away ceiling tile, I believe, the fact that Jack had told police that she had taken her purse and everything, that told them that he clearly hid those items himself and he was lying about everything. So he was arrested and he was charged with Jenifer's murder. As this is happening, the two kids are now being granted custody and they're now in the care of Jenifer's parents, who would have remaining custody on them from this point moving forward. Jack McCrady's trial started on October 20th, 1996. So during his trial, they would bring forth a couple of Jenifer's coworkers, and the coworkers would testify that Jenifer had been discussing with them that she was planning on divorcing Jack, she was going to get divorce papers drawn up and she was leaving him. They brought up other witnesses because Jack had told everyone that their marriage was great, everything was going perfect. It was no problems whatsoever, normal arguments, but that's it. Well, they brought up witnesses who said that's definitely not true. They argued a lot more than what he said. Jenifer was no longer happy in this marriage and she wanted out. Jenifer was planning on taking the two kids and just leaving and getting full custody of them. They actually think that on the night of September 19th, 1996, Jenifer told him that I'm leaving you. And they probably got into a huge argument. At this point, the kids were likely asleep in bed because they didn't hear anything. And they think at some point that night, while Jenifer now had fallen asleep in bed, because she was wearing her pajamas and she had no shoes on when she was found, they think that he took his .357, put it to the back of her head as she slept, and shot her. And they also had evidence because I guess they found a trash bag, like her head was in a trash bag when they found her body. They think that he had put in a trash bag over her head to basically collect all the blood. He then put her into the blue sleeping bag and then brought her to the location where he buried her. And they believe he actually left his two very young children alone in the house, asleep, as he went to go bury their mother in a shallow grave. He was in a rush. He had to do this fast, so he's only able to bury her in just a few inches of earth. They think he was probably planning on coming back to dig up the body to move her somewhere else, but the heat fell on him way too quickly, much quicker than he anticipated. And so the jury takes over the case, and for about 15 hours or so, they deliberate, and they finally come back with a verdict. Jack McCrady is found guilty of the murder of his wife. Jack McCrady is sentenced to the maximum term, which in this case is 15 years to life. Jack has been up for parole, I think at least twice at this point, but he has been denied each time. The parole board in the more recent one said he still poses a threat, basically, if they were to let him go. And it doesn't sound like he's ever acknowledged or admitted that he killed her, so there's no remorse or anything about it. And that night, basically, when he killed Jenifer, he took away both parents from their kids. He left their children parentless. Thankfully, they had a very loving home to go to, and they were raised by Jenifer's parents, but, this was all because Jack basically wanted to control Jenifer. Didn't want her to leave him. Maybe that's embarrassing to him or something. But he's never told his story. He's always denied having anything to do with it. So the real motive and the real reasons behind it are pretty much really technically unknown. And where he actually did this, they never had blood at the house. So if they only speculated that she was shot in bed, but they didn't have evidence of that. So where Jack did this is also a mystery. And what truly happened the night she was murdered, mystery. And now two children grew up without a mom and grew up without a dad. And that's so unfair, especially as their parent, to do that to them. I mean, it's cruel for many reasons, but that's just evil. But thankfully, in the end, and a lot of this is thanks to a psychic pointing out certain things, thankfully, in the end, Jenifer was able to get the justice she very rightfully deserved. Man, she was sloppy, and she left a trail of herself and her movements everywhere. Hello, true crimeers. This is the case of David Nixon. Viewer discretion is advised. David Roy Nixon was born on March 9th, 1962. He was born and raised in New Hampshire, but eventually, by the time this particular case occurs, he's living in Grapevine, Texas. Yeehaw! Don't do that ever again. You got it. David, again, by the time this case occurs, had been married previously twice, divorced twice, and was currently dating a woman. He brokered deals on houses, and he was super successful at that. There is a quote about him that basically states that he could sell a screen door to someone on a submarine. That is how good of like a salesperson he was. Throughout the 1990s, he was a big deal in this particular field. He had advertisements everywhere, and he was making a lot of good money. Good money? Is there such thing as bad money? Well, I guess it could have been drugs. So yeah, good money. I mean, we're talking like he's brokering $1 million deals. So he's doing well for himself. During one of his marriages, he did end up having a child. He had a son, and that was the only child he had. His son, I believe, was born in about 1991. After his second marriage ended, he would end up at some party where he would meet a woman named Tracy Frame. Apparently, she was a bookkeeper somewhere. She worked in accounting. David was like instantly smitten with her. She had, she was beautiful, and he said she had these piercing crystal green eyes that he just fell in love with. And the two of them, he and Tracy Frame, would end up getting a home in Grapevine, Texas. From multiple witnesses, David and Tracy's relationship always appeared to be fun, and it always appeared to be that they were super loving towards each other. They were a popular couple. They would mingle and go out to parties all the time together. However, after some time, they started to have arguments, especially when it came to money. It's always about money, which is kind of unbelievable because David really lavished her with a lot of great gifts. He bought her a freaking Lexus. She had her own black Lexus. He had a white Lexus. He took her on cruises around the world. But according to, I think, one of the ex-wives of him, Tracy did not like the fact that he was giving so much money as child support for his child. It sounded like she would rather that money be spent on her. And then David makes a mistake. So apparently he is, at the time, around the time this case happens, he is about $100,000 in debt. And this debt is to the IRS. He doesn't want to lose his house. And so what he does is he signs the house over to Tracy Frame, his girlfriend. And then their relationship becomes more tumultuous. It becomes worse. There's more fighting. There's more arguing. And then it sounds like there was a plan to break up. And if that was the case, Tracy, the house would be hers because he put it in her name. It was April of 2002 where David calls 911 to say his girlfriend locked him out of the house and she changed all of the locks. The police came. There was obviously an argument between David and Tracy, but eventually the argument was simmered and she allowed David back in the house. Tracy did not want to give up this house. This was her house now, in her mind. On April 20th, 2002, David Nixon was supposed to have dinner with his son, who at this point is now 10 years old. His ex-wife, Donna, would end up calling 911 after she couldn't reach him and also couldn't reach Tracy. She was concerned because this wasn't like David. David was a really loving father. He always showed up for his son. And so this was just beyond bizarre. The last time anyone can say they actually laid eyes on David and saw him was a couple of days prior to the report of him disappearing. Was on April 18th, 2002. On the day he was reported missing on April 22nd, the police got another phone call with regards to a fire. When the fire was put out, the source would shock everyone. It was a body. It was a human body of an adult. This was literally just 3 hours after Donna had called 911 to report him missing. And at first, police thought this was very strange just because she reports him missing and then they find his body on fire. They were like, did she set up this phone call to make it look like she was innocent, or was she guilty of something? They weren't really sure at first. So the body was found just like on the street next to a drainage ditch, and it had been wrapped in this blue blanket. And when they opened up the blanket, they found these like metal wires kind of everywhere. And they thought that was strange because blankets don't have metal in them. unless it's a heating blanket. And that's when they determined that the blanket he was wrapped in was in fact a heating blanket, but the plug was missing. Gasoline had been poured on his body and on the blanket and then was lit on fire. And it looked like this person had tried to shove the body in that little drainage ditch, which is it's too small for a person to fit through. This isn't freaking Pennywise and, Georgie at the drainage ditch here. It would have to take dental records to actually formally identify the body as belonging to David Nixon. David was 40 years old at the time. They were able to determine that David Nixon, his cause of death was a single gunshot wound to his head. And I believe it was to the back of his head. At first, police would go to the house that he lived in and they searched the home and they didn't see anything all that unusual. They didn't see like any blood spatter. They didn't see a sign of a struggle. They didn't find an actual crime scene in this house. Everything seems to be relatively clean and in order. The one thing that did stand out, they found out that Tracy had actually literally just purchased a new mattress for their bedroom. Like the day he would have been killed or the day afterwards, that's when she bought this new mattress and completely disposed the other one, and they never found it. They thought that was strange, because it is strange. But the first person they really zoned in on in terms of who had a motive was actually his ex-wife, Donna, the mother of his child. And this is because his son was the beneficiary to a $500,000 life insurance policy, which then in turn would have essentially been handled by Donna. But they couldn't find any evidence or proof that she had anything to do with this, and I think they even alibied her and discovered that there was just no way she could have done anything to David. Near the body, when his body was found, they found tire tracks in the mud. The tire tracks were kind of strange to police because it looked as if the tracks were made by the same vehicle, but the tracks themselves looked different from one another, as if there were different tires on the same vehicle. It seemed like the tracks came from something like a big truck, maybe like a moving truck or something like that. So they look into that aspect, and lo and behold, Tracy Frame, she got a moving truck. She had rented a Penske moving vehicle. And I believe there were witnesses who stated that they saw a Penske moving vehicle in the driveway of their home around the time that he would have likely been murdered. Then they find David Nixon's white Lexus parked in the parking lot of a Tom Thumb grocery store. So police go to the grocery store and ask them, hey, do you have surveillance footage? Do you have CCTV stuff? And they said, yep, we absolutely do. And so they look up the footage. And what they find is just a bunch of evidence of someone literally dropping off. They see when the person pulls in and drops off the white Lexus. The person gets out of the car and then begins walking towards the right. And then they are seen getting into a black Lexus and then driving away from the parking lot. Well, they also find video footage of a Penske moving truck also coming into the parking lot. And this all lines up because Tracy, her car is a black Lexus. David's car was a white Lexus. And then they have this proof that she purchased or rented a moving truck by Penske. But they also found footage of Tracy entering the store itself during one of these trips. She goes in there to buy a bunch of cleaner stuff and muriatic acid. And she bought like a lot of it. They get footage of her walking into the store. They have footage from her actually purchasing the items. They see her on camera. They confirm it's her making these purchases. She even used her loyalty card, which they confirmed with the timestamps. Like, she was everywhere on camera. It's believed she parked the Penske truck there for some time, so she didn't have it in the driveway for too long of a time to raise some red flags in neighbors' eyes, but she still had it at the house for enough time that people noticed it. They bring in Tracy Frame just to question her at first. And the thing is when they found his body, she had not been informed of that. But when she goes into police, at first they tell her they have found David deceased, but they don't say anything about the circumstances by it. She hadn't known yet because this all was happening very quickly. And she asked the question, well, how did you even identify him? They hadn't told her his body was burned. They hadn't mentioned it at all yet. So then they inform her of like how he was found, how had been shot. And then they go into their evidence finding where they find all the footage and the Penske truck and all that. Because at that point, once she kind of raised some eyebrows with some of her statements from the moment they informed her of his death, they really wanted to look at her a lot. So they're interviewing several people close to David, including both of his ex-wives and other, colleagues and stuff. And it turns out Tracy Frame had told multiple stories to people with regards to why or how David is missing. One of her stories was he left on his own accord and he'll be back. One person, she said, I don't even know where he is. I have no idea. Then she gave like specific locations of where he was, but never the same story to all these people. Like, she's an idiot. I'm sorry, but she's an idiot. Tracy then tries to tell police that David Nixon was kind of a monster because she said that she had gotten pregnant and that he had essentially forced her to get an abortion when she didn't want to. And then she would end up telling friends sometime later that she had a miscarriage because David pushed her down some stairs. But then she would later confess to those friends that she lied about that and that she did end up getting an abortion. Her diary, she had written several things about this, how she had a lot of resentment towards David for asking her to get an abortion. And so there may have been motives there as well of like just not, she felt angry about this. But in the end, they never found proof that he like forced her against her will. It was more of we need to have an abortion here because, we can't have a child in this particular relationship. It wasn't like you put a gun to her head and say, get an abortion. She did it. She didn't have to do it, but she did it. Tracy, by so many different witnesses' accounts, was such a demanding person. She expected a lot in terms of gifts and money. She wanted to be showered with everything, with all these expensive gifts and stuff by David. She was materialistic, and she did not allow David to really ever have friends once they became involved. Anytime a friend would try to hang out with David, she just wouldn't let it happen. She would argue with them. She would say, you can't hang out with them. You need to hang out with me. Me. It's always me you got to be with. So he ended up losing friends, and it got to a point where this relationship just wasn't working. And there were indications, there were signs, there was evidence that he was working on purchasing a new home and secretly getting furniture to move into that home to just be completely done with her. Police asked her, well, why did you get a Penske truck then? And she said, it was just to move things to like a Goodwill store, just some things from the house. She never went to Goodwill. They never found any evidence on camera footage or anything that she ever entered the Goodwill she said she went to, or any Goodwill. Goodwill keeps records of their donations and the things that she said she donated. All these Goodwill stores had no records of it whatsoever. They also brought in cadaver dogs, and they had the cadaver dogs, look for scents. They found the dog would hint that the trunk of Tracy's car hinted towards like human remains. Another piece of evidence they found was the control device for a heating blanket. But the heating blanket, police could not find anywhere. When police researched the control, what blanket this belonged to, they would find out it belonged to that exact blanket that he was found wrapped up in. So they know that he was wrapped up in a blanket from his home, meaning he was killed in his home, more than likely. And then they found out about the mattress purchase. And so they came to this conclusion that she must have shot David in the back of his head while he was asleep. They found out that they had recently purchased a gun for the house, but after this murder, the gun was never found. It's just so much was stacking up against her, but she just kept denying it, and she kept pushing blame on other people. She's like, look at the other ex-wives. They had financial motives, or one of them did. Police did find out that, I think it was his second wife, their marriage ended kind of badly, and it got to a point where he got a restraining order against her. But in the end, it all kind of just sort of worked out, and there was never any violence between the two of them. The crime scene investigators, even after spraying luminol, couldn't find any blood or signs that acid or bleach was used in the house to clean, and so they couldn't confirm the crime scene was the house. But everything pointed to Tracy, that she had to have done it in that house, and it could have only been her. They've been able to rule out everybody else, but they can't rule out Tracy. The woman seen on the camera at the supermarket, literally dropping off. I mean, they have this person dropping off his white Lexus exactly in the spot where it was later found. Then that person walking to a black Lexus and pulling it away. What are the odds of somebody else having a black Lexus that also killed him and left his car? Why would that person have access to the keys to his car? She confirmed herself she rented the Penske truck. She dropped the Penske truck off at the same parking lot near where she left his car. She was sloppy. She was so bad at all of this. And she was just caught red-handed. She was charged with his murder anyway. And at trial, her defense team tried to say that Tracy was a sweet, nice, kind person. She was so loving and she couldn't hurt a fly. David was this controlling monster of a person. But everyone would say actually that was really more Tracy. There were witnesses say, that's not David. That was Tracy, who was the monstrous, controlling person who wanted to basically puppet his life and not allow him to do anything with his friends or anything. He had to give her everything, all of his time, all of the stuff like gifts and money. And then she found out that he was planning to just cut her off. And so she acted. They do believe that Tracy Frame acted alone in this. They could not find any evidence that she had help. Tracy she's a much smaller frame, and David was kind of a bigger guy. So what they think she did was, because the Penske truck came with a dolly. They think that she shot him in the bed. She then got the truck. She brought the dolly into the house and laid it on the bed, and either pulled his body over with the blanket he was wrapped in, or somehow got him onto that dolly so that she could easily wheel him off and then into the truck. But I don't know why there would have been human remains scent found in her car trunk. I'm not sure if she maybe left bloody items back there at some point, and maybe that's why the dogs picked up on it. They tried to paint Tracy as a good person, but all of the evidence, physical evidence, video evidence, witness testimonies was just so overwhelmingly against her. There were at least one other person who could have had a motive, but that person was cleared completely. So the only other person with a genuine motive was Tracy, because she was about to lose her money bag, right? So she figured if he was dead, she gets to stay in this house because it's in her name, and he won't be able to dispute it. It was March of 2005 when the jury deliberated, and they came back and they decided that Tracy Frame was guilty of the murder of David Nixon. She was convicted of first-degree murder, and so she was sentenced to 40 years in prison with the possibility of parole after 20 years. However, to this day, to my knowledge, she still remains locked up in a prison cell. She did try to appeal her conviction back in 2006, but she lost. If she continues to lose appeals and she never gets paroled, she will be released when she is 74 years old. To me, it sounds like she did it. She was the guilty party. She killed him, and she is exactly where she deserves to be. And thankfully, because she was so sloppy at covering up her crime, David Nixon got the justice he rightfully deserved. But that is it for this case, True Crime and Rooney Dooney Dingleberry Dongs. I hope you found it interesting. As usual, please subscribe, give this video a like, follow me over on TikTok if you want to. Recommend a case to my email address if you want to. What is that? I don't know. Bushaka, lakata, hueta. If you're new here, that may have confused you. All of the people who've been subscribed to me for this past year and a half or so. I mean, they know what that was. They know, obviously, but I'll not explain it to you now because, yeah. Boop. I have no idea what I'm doing.